Zach Cordova with HCAP, Taos County, the Healthcare and Assistance Program. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Did I miss anybody? All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Jen. Thanks everyone for introducing themselves. I think it gives us a good sense of who's on the call. That'll be helpful for the presenters.
So I'm going to set the stage with some slides, and then I'm going to hand over the conversation to Willa to share some of her experiences, and then we'll have Steve and Monique and share their programs and initiatives. We are a little bit behind schedule, which I apologize, but I think we'll be okay. If we don't get to your questions, Monica and I will figure out a way to, gather those questions in the chat and get back to you directly. So thank you. Go ahead, Matt. So Monica, this is the information you sent in the email. Do you want to do this one real quick for us?
I keep talking and I'm on mute. Sorry about that. So, as you all know, employers from across the region are really struggling right now to recruit and retain employees. And that can be entry-level workers that are considered low income according to national standards, or it could be high-wage professionals. All across the board, we're lacking housing for workforce. You all have been asking us for more models on how you can partner up to create some housing opportunities. Our current programs are kind of limited, and they only serve a small subset of employees, usually the lowest income of the employees. So we need to be a little more creative with our solutions. Public-private partnerships is one way we can do that. And, there were some good examples out of Southern Colorado. That is a region close to ours and similar to ours. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to hear some of the examples going on in communities in Southern Colorado.
Thanks, Monica. Next, Matt. So all of our communities are unique, but I do think there's something that we share being in the southwest part of the country, our diversity. We all have a pretty beautiful climate and gorgeous backdrop. And so I think our communities have been hit a little bit harder by COVID. We've been behind in housing construction in this country for many, many years, and it's caught up with us during this COVID pandemic. We have supply chain issues still, right? So I was on a call this afternoon. We're building something in New Mexico, and most of the conversation was about when can we lock into prices, right? And how long will the suppliers hold those prices for us and things like that. I mean, this is a really unique moment in time. Many of our communities are landlocked for one reason or another, whether we're surrounded by mountains or we don't have a lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure comes up all the time in terms of challenges to providing more housing opportunities in our communities. Labor is a challenge, typically across the board. Market mismatch means, and again, this is not for every community, but in some of our communities, we have the pricing and what the builders are building to is a much higher income bracket than what the workforce can afford. And so that's what we call a market mismatch. And we have to be very intentional in diverting or partnering with the market to bring costs down so it can meet those that we want to serve. And then we've had wages have not kept up with housing in most communities for many, many years. So kind of goes back to the Los Alamos in the 40s. I think about Durango, we've had a housing crisis since the 80s, right? So this is not a new issue, but the scale is very different, right? We're in a very different moment as a country around housing. And in fact, next slide, Matt. We are moving away from using the term of affordable housing and using housing affordability because it impacts so many people now, right? You could almost start the conversation with who doesn't it impact right now. So we wanted to highlight, and I do speak a little quickly and I apologize, but I want to get to the stories and the examples because this is what you all want to hear is how do we do some stuff. I wanted to share high level how we're seeing it in the field, how we're developing employer-led housing initiatives. The process starts typically with an employer engaging us and sharing their data, right? So again, Steve, we got to do this for Fort Lewis. I don't want to steal your thunder, but with other projects we're working on as well, the employer's like, here, I can't either retain my mid-level managers or I cannot recruit my entry-level employees. Like they're very specific about who they're trying to help or get or keep. And they're giving us incomes, and they're also typically sharing tenure, like the folks that they're recruiting, do they want to rent or own? That's important information to know. So we start with that. And then we work together it can either be a housing developer, a housing consultant, or a housing agency, and the employer engages that group to create a very specific defined program that helps them with their employee challenges. And then typically the employer is also bringing a very specific resource to the table. So we're going to talk about in these different scenarios what resources we're playing with. So sometimes it's land, sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's transportation, or they're dedicating staff for programs, things like that. But the overall approach in every single scenario where we work with an employer is to leverage the employer's resources with other public resources and private capital to maximize what they can do and what they can offer to their employees. Next slide. Okay, this is the one, what's affordable housing? This is our traditional affordable housing definition. We're kind of starting to use the term regulated affordable housing. It's the housing where we've subsidized it and it's only for a certain subset of folks in our community, and there's some kind of restriction on it. And we are also referring to naturally occurring affordable housing. So you may have older apartments in your community that rent at $700 a month. That would be naturally occurring affordable housing. But again, this affordable housing term of nobody pays more than 30% for their housing is kind of outdated, right? Because so few people are only paying 30%. Next slide. However, that's still our goal. And I just want to share a couple other terms before we launch into strategy work. Often in our industry, we talk about area median income, and that is a tool we use, and it's at the county or at the city level. And it shows us what the incomes are, and typically the federal government, who's providing the majority of subsidies for housing right now, will dictate who qualifies for housing assistance. So this is an example from my community, but I just wanted to share the concept of area median income. And again, when we talk about workforce housing in the next slide, we may or may not be talking about these incomes. Next slide. So because the problem is so acute, we have some new terms, and I think it's important to have terms and share terms and have some agreement on what we mean. So here are the terms that we're using or hearing in our areas. Workforce housing, often at the local level, it's defined. So workforce housing in La Plata County is probably different from Taos and Santa Fe. So we just want to be really clear what it means in our communities. In my community of La Plata County, it means people who don't qualify for subsidies currently, and they cannot get into the market. So they're typically making between $50,000 and $120,000 a year, right? And they can't get into housing here. We're using middle income housing. This has actually picked up a lot of steam at the state level, and we actually have some new programs. Again, it's about the same income bracket. Community housing, this sort of starts to hint at local, right? So for communities where second home owners have taken over, and that's kind of a new phenomenon, most of the conversation is, okay, yes, let's create more product for the locals, and how do we lock that up? Attainable housing is another term that kind of can be interchanged with workforce housing. Our team, to keep things simple across populations, and people seem to really resonate with this term, is we just talk about below market housing. What that means is we are trying to create housing opportunities that could not happen in the marketplace today and require some kind of subsidy or partnership to bring the cost down for varying households or groups in our community that we want to serve. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about some of the projects we're working on that have to do with employers. The first one is we were hired last summer by the La Plata County Economic Alliance, and that's like a regional economic alliance group, and they promote creating well-paying jobs and siting projects, and it's a very dynamic group. And it's an interesting project for me because I've done a lot of housing in my own community, but this is the first time we're focusing on that missing middle, or that group that can't access subsidy. And so we're engaging different partners. We did a survey, and Matt, I might ask you for some help here, but I believe we had over 50 employers respond to our survey recently. 8 of those employers said they had land that they would like us to look at. And I can't remember how many said they might have financial resources. Matt, do you remember?
Yeah, something around 30% said that that would be kind of at play if they were involved in a partnership.
So we're doing a focus group with this this group that said, yes, we want to do something about it, the over 50 that responded to the survey that wanted to talk to us, we'll be doing a focus group in a few weeks. And again, I think this is so powerful in this moment where we are so overwhelmed with the need to have new voices, both politically and just more diversity and thinking about solutions. So we're pretty excited about this. And then what will happen in the next 2 months is our team will actually create a strategy that will talk about how the employers are going to come to the table, how we're going to leverage development versus buying down existing units, how we're going to keep people in the housing they're already in and things like that. So that's one of our projects. Fort Morgan, I've been working on this all week. So we're working with a grassroots coalition, and Cargill is a national food producer. And they were on one of our focus groups a couple of months ago, and they cannot employ like 300 people right now. They have 300 vacancies, which is wild. So we're getting ready to pitch to them a motel conversion for their workforce. And then we're also starting a housing resource center, and they will help fund positions, hopefully, that will, again, part of the challenge is creating new housing resources. Sometimes the challenge is the existing resources aren't being accessed by the people that need to access them. There's different things we're solving for, but there's a lot of resources available right now, but it doesn't do anybody any good if they don't know about them or they can't access them. So that's the program there. And again, we're pitching literally this week to Cargill to help fund some of those initiatives. You're going to hear from Fort Lewis College again. Very proud of the work we're doing with Steve Schwartz. And then thank you. It's so good to see Sonia on the call. And I don't know if we've got some of the Taos County commissioners with us today, but our team was funded last fall to do an environmental scan and help Taos County and town of Taos come up with some strategies around housing. In those conversations, a few folks kept mentioning the idea of engaging employers. So we thought, well, let's partner with Monica. Let's have a broader regional conversation and see if some ideas can get some legs and we can get excited about some strategies here. Next slide. Well, love to hand this over to you, my friend.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. And I speak almost as fast as Jen, so off we go. As I mentioned earlier on, I'm a below market housing consultant based in the Gunnison Valley of Colorado. I really focus on rural, mountain, and resort communities, all of which are now really feeling these COVID impacts and our mismatch between sort of high amenities and people who have resources from elsewhere really wanting to enjoy our communities, and our local workforce being completely kind of left in the dust, I would say, at this point. So three recent things I just wanted to share some detail on. The Eagle County School District contacted me to do a two-part thing. They really wanted to, first of all, identify their needs, their challenges, and their opportunities. And then the second part of my scope was to help them create an action plan for housing. So Matt, if we can just advance. We began this work with a pretty extensive employee survey, as well as a number of stakeholder interviews with the director of HR and the superintendent and just the various people who were touching on the challenges the district was having. And what we found was that 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was no problem for a teacher or any school district employee really to buy a home, and they were very comfortable and stable in the community. But what was happening in the space of employee recruitment was that people would be so excited to take a job in the Eagle Valley, and then they'd look at the housing market and they decline the job. And so they weren't even getting new recruits in the door. And then there was a second dynamic where if someone did take the job in the 3 to 5 year time frame of their tenure, when they wanted to shift from renting to owning, they would end up leaving the community. And so we were able, through our research, to really get into the specifics of that and start to craft the solutions that Eagle wanted to pursue to respond to those issues. Let's keep going. So, we took a deep dive on what people's plans were, what their hopes were, why they were unhappy with their housing or with the housing situations in the community. And we also really wanted to look closely at what people could afford and what was realistic. And where they wanted to live. This particular school district it's a very large county and it spans a number of jurisdictions. So not surprisingly, actually, and different than the real estate market there, people wanted to live where the largest school facilities are, close to work, right? And so, while the school district had a very promising site that was in the Upper Valley near Vail, we actually advised that they focus their early efforts on these remnant parcels that were close to their existing school facilities, because that's where their staff was the most motivated to live. We also took a look at how employees were distributed across these different bands of what they could afford to purchase and what they could afford to rent. And what we found there was that some of the district's early work was really priced too high, because the district was using the principle that they would break even on their housing. And we had to say, you really got a mismatch here, because our construction costs are so high. We advise you to shift the way you're thinking about this and really accept that in order for you to attract and retain employees, you're going to need to put some money towards that. It's not going to break even. And that they did shift in their thinking and where they're headed now. So that was a hard message to deliver, but I think it was really important as a principle for the work that they ended up doing. So as we got into the second portion of this scope of work of sort of, we feel like we really understand the employees and the employer needs. What are we going to do about them? We ended up with 3 priority sites that they would pursue to develop for employee housing. And the first of these was on their 3rd Street campus in Eagle. So it was adjacent to existing school. And it seemed really well suited for missing middle, what we call kind of missing middle home ownership. It was that opportunity for those employees who've been with the district for a while, who want to put down roots, who are ready to commit to this community to purchase. And they needed to do quite a bit of work around what were the guidelines and how do you have how do you have employee housing that's owned, and what happens if employees leave the district, and sort of grapple with the philosophical questions there. Then if we go, the second priority site was adjacent to their high school in Edwards. And this felt like it was a really good site for rental housing based on the ability to have more density and the way the topography of the site worked. You could really kind of build into these banks, these hillsides. And it's a place where they knew that a lot of new employees coming into the area would be able to just walk right across the street to work. And they felt like this was, that they would focus on 1 and 2 bedroom units with the intent that this would be kind of a first step, and then people could hopefully graduate from there into other housing options later. And then the third priority site was this Malloy Park, which was in the Upper Valley, and it had a lot of challenges around infrastructure and water, actually, which was raised earlier in the introduction. So this felt like this is something they shouldn't lose sight of, because it really has the potential to deliver a significant amount of housing and address a lot of their long-term needs, but that it couldn't be the first foray out of the gate, that they needed to focus on some of these smaller sites that could be earlier, easier wins and test their markets, as well as test the, how much voters and community members really supported this concept of what they were calling teacher adjacent. So, employee housing that is specific to the district employees. And then, out of their housing action plan came other steps around having housing navigation as a formal function within their HR department, and looking to partner up like on a larger parcel such as Malloy, partner up with some of the other employers like the hospital district, which was having very similar struggles. And the feeling that, perhaps between the two agencies, they could have the capital and the bandwidth to take on something of this magnitude. And that needed to be, again, that more like longer play of like a 5 to 10 year time horizon. So that's kind of, that's the needs and actions of the Eagle School District in a nutshell. And if we move now to the Gunnison Regional Transit Authority. So this is a quasi-governmental agency that does runs the buses within the Gunnison Valley as well as the airport. And this particular parcel is located within the city of Gunnison, and the city had purchased it to be a park. And you can see that it has this sort of wetlands running through it. It connects to the Gunnison River and is in a part of town that was underserved by parks. And as they got into their park planning, everyone kept saying, but our priority is housing, our priority is housing. And the site had some existing structures on it that they were able to actually repurpose for housing, as well as making the determination that you can kind of see it faintly around the edges of the site, that some elements of this land should actually be used for community or below market housing. So they were able to find a development partner who, this is still the city I'm talking about, the city of Gunnison. They found a development partner who would do 2 deed restricted units for every 1 market rate unit. And so the site is ending up as 2/3 kind of community below market housing and 1/3 market. And the developer is able to make that a profitable proposition, although just barely, I would say, as costs have been rising. And then, so while all of this was being planned and the city and the developer are working together, the Regional Transit Authority was like, we cannot keep bus drivers and we need to provide a roof over their head. And so they ended up coming to an agreement with the developer to purchase this 5-plex. And so it works out really nicely because he has sort of an automatic takeout, or what we call in the industry takeout. He has someone who's committed to buy those units before that he even put a shovel in the ground. And that's allowing him to expedite some of the development and get to those market rate lots where he can have a profit a little earlier. And the Regional Transit Authority will own and manage those for their employees in perpetuity. So that one's pretty straightforward, I think, although it was a little bit of just, I think, fortunate timing around the two projects, the needs of the Transit Authority and this other project kind of converging. That one's under construction right now. And then finally, Hinsdale County. So I wanted to mention this this was a technical assistance project that was sponsored by the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And what they've been doing is matching consultants like myself with small rural opportunities, I would call them. All the projects are less than 30 units of below market housing. And so in Hinsdale in particular, we're in Southwest Colorado, and Lake City is the only municipality within the area. It's incredibly remote. And as you can see on this map, almost the entire county is Forest Service land. So what both the county, the city, and the Forest Service have all been experiencing is that all their cute little cabins in Lake City have been bought up by second homeowners. And they are literally having plow drivers and avalanche forecasters and, and the city administrator unable to find housing. And so within Lake City, there was a parcel that the Forest Service owned that was eligible under the Farm Bill for a long-term lease for workforce housing. So our team got to work on analyzing sort of what do local Hinsdale County and Forest Service employees make? What kind of rents or for sale prices could we offer? And how might we design this site if we could use that farm bill and have access to it for workforce housing. So we worked with the community there. You see some of the electeds and administrators playing with Legos at the bottom of this slide. And the design we came up with is on the next slide. So, Lake City is a historic mining town. We were inspired by the vernacular of that with these little pitched roofs. But we also, given that it is so remote and there really is not much in the way of construction contractor presence in that community. So we created the design so that they would be compatible with offsite construction. So there's 2 factories now in Colorado that are doing modular construction. And we think this would be a really good opportunity to try that. And the Forest Service also had some specific requirements around replacing an existing mobile home on the site for their employees to be able to use. And they wanted to be able to kind of get in and get out quickly. They have seasonal workers and sometimes firefighters and different employees who need access and they want to be on the edge of the site. So you see them over on the right-hand side there. They also needed showers for like trail crews and a place to store tools securely. And so that's the little building in the back. And then the rest of the site would be 1 and 2 bedroom units for rent for Hinsdale County employees. So, they use the example of the snowplow driver, the sheriff's deputy, like a lot. We really tried to set up the price points so that they would be appropriate for those professionals that they've been having such a hard time retaining in their community. So this one is not yet under construction. There's still a significant funding gap that we're trying to address. But I think we have the right ingredients in terms of a program that would work in this community. And a timeline around the administrative steps to work through that Forest Service process. So those are my 3 that I get to share with you today, and would love to circle back with questions after the other panelists have gone.
Thank you so much, Willa. Steve, would you like to share what we've been doing at Fort Lewis?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Matt, if you want to go to the next one. So just to provide some context for where we are, Jen and I have known each other since I think we first started working in the early 2000s on this issue. So there's kind of the pre and the post COVID that I think is really important for the work that we've been doing. Pre-COVID, I mean, there's been a problem with housing in Durango for years, since I've been at the college 25 years. Pre-COVID, however, we would, do demand studies with our faculty and staff and students, and almost to a person, faculty would say, yeah, we want to make more money, but we really don't want to live on campus. So there's been the problem, but there wasn't a willingness to really pivot. Students, the same thing with students at some level. We have about 1,500 units for our students. And I bring up students because really they are part of our workforce in Durango. And it's very important to the college. But the students in the same breath, where we had maybe 95% capacity in our 1,500 units on campus, for the most part, once students were out of their freshman, sophomore year, they wanted to live in town. COVID shifted everything. The price of housing went way up to the point where we have a lot of difficulty attracting and retaining junior faculty. Even coming in at $60,000, $70,000 a year salaries are not able to afford housing in the local area community. They have to drive pretty far. Students at the same time got priced out of the market. So all of a sudden demand went through the roof to the point where now the college is working with local apartment complexes to rent from them to meet the demand, because we've also been growing in enrollment. So pricing pressures. With that, the Board of Trustees kind of directed us and said, figure something out. And so at that point, we brought Jen in. So again, we've worked with Jen for years. One of our board members actually worked for Jen back in the day. So we hired Project Moxie, who came in, evaluated our need, analyzed best practices, did an environmental scan, looked at the demand studies that we had done in the past, figured out what we needed to do, and came up with some solutions. So that's where I'm going to go next. So Matt. So they did a full-blown housing report for us. You know, we worked in tandem with them, and basically came up with a three-pronged strategy, which right now we are in the process of implementing. So the first strategy was a down payment assistance program. The second one was, and so the down payment assistance is to help with the market to purchase. The second one was development of land on campus for workforce housing. And then the third one, which actually is the one that's the most exciting, but it's going to be the most difficult, is working with the community for partnerships where we leverage, where we all look at our assets together, and rather than looking in a silo at what we do, but really look at, you know, how do we leverage what we have as partners to see what we can do for the Durango community. So Matt, next one. So I'll go over each strategy just a little bit. So on the home buyer assistance program, our board, so the college and our foundation board each agreed to allocate $500,000 towards a mortgage assistance program. So we have $1 million right now, which was just approved probably about a month ago. Now we're in the process of working out with a lot of attorneys. You know, no offense to attorneys on the call, we love them, but it's going to take us a lot of work to figure out how to put in a plan in place that meets our goals, as well as all the federal lending regulations that are involved there. But the idea behind this is that the college would provide funding for junior faculty and staff, that we would work with a local organization called the Homes Fund, who would manage the process and the lending for us, because the college doesn't have that expertise. And then they would leverage other funding sources out there, kind of thinking about it as a way of capital stacking. You know, what is available to people at different price points to stack up the money so that they can actually get into an affordable unit. And Jen's been very helpful. Project Moxie has been very helpful in helping us think through this. So right now we're working through with the state's attorney general, because we are a public institution. So we are the state. We have to work with the AG's office, our board, and again, the Homes Fund. So that's where we are on that one right now. Matt, next slide. Thank you. This one is developing, again, looking at what are the assets that the college could bring to the table, basically for our own needs, but then also how do we leverage that from a community perspective. So the college has about 8 acres right now that is undeveloped. We have a little bit more than that, but this would be the ideal place. We actually started working with, we have been working with a local high school, and we leased land to them to build a high school that would be adjacent to the parcel that we're looking at for the affordable housing. The idea would be that this would be a rental play. So, you know, with the down payment assistance, that's an ownership avenue. This would be rental. The challenge with the college, because we are the state again, we can't sell our land, or if we did, there'd have to be deed restrictions, and it would just start getting really ugly. So we thought that we really need a rental option for faculty and staff. We probably would have more units than what we could fill. So, and it would also help us with some of our funding mechanisms to have FLC employees, Fort Lewis College employees, as our first priority, and then open it up to the community, whether that's our local school district or county employees, city employees, perhaps the local hospital. Those are all things to be determined. Thinking about this as a public-private partnership, as opposed to the college building it. We know how to build residence halls. We've never built units for rental for faculty and staff. So in this process, what we've done now is recognizing that in order to get this thing off the ground, we need expertise. So we put out an RFP to engage an owner's representative. We received 3 responses to that, and we've interviewed 2. Project Moxie was one of those. And now we're evaluating those and reaching back out to 2 of those entities to figure out how to make this work forward. And again, we're looking at both student housing, which would be more apartment complex, and faculty staff housing, which would be rental units for faculty and staff. Again, the idea being, what can we leverage that the college has to bring, to drive down pricing?
Except they struck one.
I think we've got somebody jumping on. Somebody mute. And so what we're thinking from the college perspective is land is very expensive in Durango. So if we can provide the land, that can drive down the cost. The other thing that we have at our disposal is cheap financing. As a public entity of not-for-profit, we have access to tax-exempt financing on some of the things that we do. And then also, because we're the state, we're actually kind of a little island in Durango. So we don't necessarily have to abide by city code requirements, which takes some of the costs out of the stream. So we're trying to say, what can we leverage there that we could then pass along to our faculty and staff or our students? Okay, Matt, thank you. And then the last one, this one is the most amorphous of all of those. We've started having a lot of discussions with folks in the local community. Our thinking is that by opening up our rental units to the community, then we also can look at to the community and say, what land do you have available that Fort Lewis College could become a partner with you or the community to kind of, again, leverage the cost to drive money out of the kind of the construction stream. One of the things that we talked about last week was an interesting thought, Jen. We haven't talked about it, but you know, what are the things that cause our prices to be so high? And you mentioned this on the first slide, one of the first slides, but is, you know, the cost of labor, the cost of land, the cost of code. Where can we start driving those things out? When Fort Lewis College builds a building, for instance, a new academic facility, we have to actually bring labor down from either up from Albuquerque or down from Denver, and then house them for 18 to 24 months. And that adds to the cost of our project. Are there ways that we could build housing that would be temporary housing for labor to come in and stay there that could help drive down the cost for everybody in the community? So really thinking about what are the costs and how do you drive some of the profit and the cost out of the stream. So again, this one is going to take a lot of time to develop, but it's probably the one that's the most exciting for us. And so in summary, our goal right now is to launch the mortgage assistance program sometime in either the first or second quarter of 2022. We know that the rental housing is going to take us a while. I always put like a minimum of 24 months. My boss, the president of the college, always tells me, it's like, you got to do it in 18 months, Steve. But you know, you got to be realistic too. So we're starting our due diligence and we're in the process of hiring an owner's representative for that. And then community partnerships are ongoing. That's going to take a while. And then what the last thing is we'll be updating our market demand analysis this spring and then kind of tightening the results there so that when we go out for financing, that we have proven demand, which will help us to drive down costs. So with that, that's what I have. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks again for joining us, Steve. It was really thorough. All right, Monique, we'd love to have you finish us out with what you're doing with the Giving Back 1% to La Plata program.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be able to share this story of an emerging idea and project with our neighbors and friends in New Mexico. And it's not even quite off the ground yet, but it's gaining steam. And just as a reminder, just kind of the various hats I wear, I am an advisor for the Local First Foundation. I was also the managing director of Local First, which is an independent business alliance here in Durango, Colorado, which is kind of an important piece of this story. in terms of how this project emerged. I also happen to be co-owner of Table to Farm Compost. You know, we all have many hats here in Durango, and that is a business that is supporting the Impact Fund. So here's something, which is that I am not an expert in affordable or workforce housing. What I am an expert in is really looking at the community issues that we need to address and how to come up with creative ideas. So that's what you're going to hear today. So we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to give you some context for the organization that helped to start this. So Local First is an independent business alliance here in Durango, Colorado. We've been around about 12 years. We started the Local First Foundation a couple of years ago, whose mission is to build self-reliance, a sense of place, and well-being for the stakeholders here in La Plata County. And the reason we did that is that as a 501c3, we are able to implement our own programs, be a fiscal sponsor for other efforts, and really tie together the community-facing piece with the business piece. And I think Steve just talked about, you know, all the benefits of being a private 501c3 and having that ability, right, tax exempt ability. In addition to this issue, we do work on Thrive Living Wage. We work on healthcare. That was an issue that came up in our community that we got pretty creative about in terms of setting up a healthcare cooperative and saving the region $3.5 million. And so we're just always looking for interesting ways to work with the community. So we'll go to the next slide, and I will share the heroes of our story. It looks like there's some logos missing, which is sad, but I will, oh, there we go. I'll walk you through. Nice. So these are, you know, some of the businesses in our community that they're all heroes to us, and really the importance of local independent business and the importance of giving back to community. So Tailwind Nutrition, Durango Organic, Shaw Solar, I'll let you read all of those. So these businesses at this point have pledged to the La Plata Impact Fund, and we haven't even launched yet, but they will be the businesses that really kind of try to inspire other businesses to engage. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit how this started. So a few of those businesses came to the Local First Foundation and said, hey, we're inspired by 1% for the Planet. If you know what that is, it's a Patagonia initiative, and we want to do something like that here. But, you know, like Durango, it's got to be our thing. We want it to be local. We want it to have, you know, our fingerprints on it. So we evolved this idea over the last year to be the La Plata Impact Fund. It is in concept that a business gives 1% of its gross revenue back to philanthropic efforts in whatever way that it would like. It can be in kind, it can be cash. Here's the tweak on the 1%, which is that 25% of that 1% is a cash contribution to the La Plata Impact Fund. And that cash contribution leverages all of the other businesses' contributions so that, hey, you wrote a check for $25,000, we're trying to raise $1 million. So you just leveraged your $25,000 into $1 million. And so it's a meaningful way to give back to the community. And like the word impact, it's a different philanthropic model. So as opposed to giving small amounts to lots of groups, which is a great way to provide support to many issues in our community, each year the La Plata Impact Fund chooses an issue, and we try to really change and move the needle on that issue. And so it's slightly different than maybe some other philanthropic models you would see. So let's go to the next slide, because it's really important that this initiative is led by local independent businesses, which, as it turns out in this workforce housing issue, is a really important player, right? All of our businesses need workforce to be here and be as close as possible. So now on other issues like the environment, regenerative agriculture that this group will be taking on, there's still, you know, ties to the business community. And really the interest is to inspire other businesses to do the same and take the pledge. And so the administrative support is very low overhead. The Local First Foundation charges basically direct costs for time to the Impact Fund, but we're trying to get every dollar back out into the community, and then we'll do some collective impact reporting. So let's go to the next one. You know, why would businesses in your community want to do something like this? So if you're thinking that you would want to start something that provides this kind of independent, flexible funding on an issue like workforce housing, you know, here we have a very, very passionate local independent business community that cares a lot about connecting to their customer base, the value-based customers that say, wow, you're part of this impact fund. That's really cool. So it's branding and marketing. It amplifies your voice as a business. I think in the chat here, which by the way, I put our website in there. I saw somebody talked about a B Corp, similar to that concept that it's like, oh, I'm going to go to that business because they're part of the impact fund. And it really does make a meaningful difference. Our goal, if you go to the next slide, that's nuts and bolts. Why don't you go to the next slide, because I know we're running out of time and I really want to tell you about the goal. So our goal is to raise $1 million. And so if we were going to raise $1 million, that means that we would need, 400 million in total business revenue, and that 1 million of that would go into the impact fund. In addition to the business community, we are open to, obviously individuals that are here and have, really called Durango home and made a great living here to contribute. And so we have not officially launched yet, but we are at 150,000, which we feel like, we feel pretty proud about that over the last couple of months. And so our goal is to pick a project, be able to dialogue with the community about that project, say, okay, we're 20% of the way there. Let's get the rest of the business community on board. And actually, we have talked to a few partners here and businesses that said, yeah, once you pick the project, which we're looking to Jen and others and maybe Steve to help us do that, we're going to be able to get to that $1 million goal because, businesses will understand where they're going to make an impact. So why don't you just go to the next slide? And I just wanted to underscore again that while, workforce housing is our issue this year, that I think this could be an interesting model for a variety of issues in your community, tackling healthcare, tackling local food, that kind of thing. So I'll pause there because I know we're kind of running short on time. And if folks are really interested in the nuts and bolts of like, well, how are you managing the funds, right? How does the foundation act as a fiscal sponsor, all of that, I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards. So thank you very much.
Monique, we did not mean to short you, and I bet there's going to be questions about your model. And I just want to make one other comment when we chatted about what you were doing. So my Taos friends that I'm working with, I do all these interviews to figure out what's happening. This is what I found when I was doing interviews. So you never know what's going on in the community that's under the radar that you want to focus on. But the point, and I think, again, this might resonate with Northern New Mexico, is yes, we would love employers to help finance some things, but we need your political will. That's really what we need. So I'm shameless here, but if we're getting, we can raise money, but if we don't have anywhere to cite projects, we're in big trouble. So we're hoping that that'll be another piece of the puzzle and something that Monique's team can help us with. So that was a lot of information. And again, I know a lot of us spoke fairly quickly because we wanted you to get all of these ideas out on the table. At this point, I think we'd love to take questions, comments, thoughts. There's been a few in the chat we've tried to address, but do any of these ideas resonate?
Somebody has any questions? Come on, ask some questions.
This is Margaret. I have a question.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know. My camera isn't working. I apologize for that. But I think my question was for Willa, and it was about Hinsdale County in Colorado, the U.S. Forest Service parcel. We're kind of looking at a similar model in Los Alamos with a long-term lease that's publicly owned, not by Los Alamos County. And I'm just wondering how that structure works under Colorado statute, or what the limitations are. In New Mexico, we've done through the state land office, 99-year lease, 100-year lease, that kind of thing. So is that pretty much the only way to make that happen when federal land becomes available? Or
Yeah, so I mean, the specifics of Hinsdale is that it's Forest Service land, and I believe that their time horizon is 50 years. But most other things I work on, we try for longer land leases because it's you know, it's easy, you want the land lease to be the very longest thing of all of the different commitments you're stacking up, whether that's, you know, mortgage, construction financing, deed restrictions, and so forth. So if in the layer cake, I always want the lease to be like the most secure. But I also think, you know, it's pretty well accepted. If it's more straightforward with rental housing, right? If there's a single owner of whatever is built on top. And it does add a little bit of legal complexity, but I feel like it's pretty, like land leases are pretty well accepted by lenders and other financial institutions that are working on below market housing. And I do like it from that ongoing stewardship piece as well, of like, this is public lands and should have a touch base in the future about its ongoing use and is it still serving the community. So it's interesting that you mentioned the state land board, because Colorado also has a state land board, but I have not worked on any of their parcels. Jen, have you?
You know, we have a huge parcel in Durango, and we've talked about it for years, but it's not gotten very far. So yeah, it's definitely not the low-lying fruit, but I think with the market squeeze we have, people are going to start looking again at state land board parcels, because we have to.
Thank you so much.
So I had a question, maybe to Steve or others. If a community college or a university puts in more dormitory availability, does that have the impact of freeing up inventory in the rest of the community?
Yeah, definitely for Durango, it does. So for years, we've kind of had I wouldn't call it a love-hate relationship, because it's not like that. But we'll get pushback from some of our local leaders about the number of students that live in the community, and they're taking up rental stock. So anything that we can do and actually build it on the campus is a benefit to our community, because it frees up other marketable stock within the community. On the other hand, you know, a lot of our students might live with parents and that kind of thing. So does that help kind of get to where you're going with that?
It does.
I can chime in on that one too, because I think that, you know, as geeks who work on this stuff all the time, we're always thinking about sort of this whole spectrum of different kinds of housing choices and having people have the mobility to move around within that. So I really like employer housing as another sort of sliver in that layer cake, or like pie, you know, piece of pie in that allows people different kinds of mobility options. And, you know, to come and try out a community or have a job for a while, or, you know, use it as a stepping stone into the market, or just, I think there's a lot of different things that can be good there. I have a mixed feelings, I think, about the sort of create more supply, and that, you know, well, I'll say it this way. I have seen a lot of times and this is just sort of in general building below market housing. I'll give an example of Crested Butte. Like, they did a bunch of new missing middle home ownership, and they actually found there was some really nice movement that happened within the rental market, is like right when that came online, but it gets absorbed so fast. So another example is, like, I was working in Boulder, Colorado, and there's sort of the epiphany of unaffordability, right? And the university opened a 600-bed student housing facility. We had our vacancy rate stabilized and our rent stabilized for like 6 months, and then they just started going up again. So I was like, you know, sometimes it just feels like the work is sort of never finished. But yes, I think you can see those measurable impacts. And I'm a huge believer in creating more choices and more chances for people to move around who are currently sort of forced into housing situations that don't really work very well for them.
And I just want to make a comment. Oh, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
I was just going to make one other comment about our building house. So, you know, so our dorms aren't necessarily always filled. You know, our residence halls aren't always necessarily filled year round. So in the summer, a lot of times we'll have some vacancy. One of the things that we've been approached by recently are some of our local food service providers in town, asking whether they could use some of our vacant property during the time when we don't have students there. So that's one of the things that we're exploring right now. So we could provide lower priced housing, which is beneficial to the college, and it's also beneficial to the community. Sorry, Jen.
And is it Commissioner Weir or is it Brett? Your hand is up.
Yeah, Jen. So, most of this conversation has been about new construction, which of course is a key component to solving this problem anywhere. But in our area, we also have issues where we have housing that is out there, usually older housing that's underutilized because it needs to be remodeled or needs upgrades or whatever it might be. And we have Lynn Skull on the line here, and I believe she's relatively new, but I do know that Cuesta's had some success in this area. And I was really hoping if Lynn would kind of give us an overview of what they're doing in Cuesta in relation to their housing issues they have there. I don't hate to put her on the spot, but.
No problem. No, we're very proud of our lodging project. We inventoried all of the empty homes that are like legacy homes that people have kept in the family, but they're not being used. And we received some grants. Chevron helped us with some funding as well. And we started out with 2 homes as pilot projects. And then COVID hit and all of the materials went up so high that we are kind of on hold right now because of that, as well as we can't get contractors. We don't have anybody to do the work. So we're still plugging forward, but we have not had as much of, I don't want to say not as much success, but we haven't had as much results as we had hoped to have at this point. But we are still moving forward in that direction and, continuing with that project.
Lynn, would you mind describing the project a little bit? And I believe it works off of a revolving fund and kind of how that works.
Can I just add something for Lynn also?
Sure.
Can you talk about the ownership of the homes? Because I think that's a really unique facet of your model, and explain that component as well.
Yeah, the homes are owned by residents. They're generational. They've been here for a long time. And so what we're trying to do is work with those folks to remodel, to get them up to livable, conditions again for long-term rentals. That is the objective, to make that housing available. And so the funding, the way I understand it, is we would give back, we would collect the rent, share part of that with the homeowner. But over the course of a couple of years, the homeowner would then pay back the amount that was spent on the remodel. So we're hoping that it's self-sustaining for the people that we're working with. But yeah, we've got a lot of homes and a lot of people looking for some place to stay, and we just need to, keep that moving forward. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of, as we all know in this meeting, a lot of our small communities have that challenge where there are a lot of either vacant homes or homes that need fixing up. And often it's very difficult to get, with the vacant homes, to get anyone interested in selling them, even though no one's living there. So I think the model that you've created could be replicated in other parts of the region, because those owners would be able to realize some benefits. A lot of times they're elderly or older, and they could use the extra income from renting the home, but you're taking out all of the work out of it for them. You're taking the property, the upgrade that needs to happen, and then the maintenance, and then the rental and property management. You're taking all of that work out of the equation. So I think it's a really excellent model.
Thank you. And, it improves the property value for them in the long run. So, it is a win-win.
And I think totally unique. I don't think I've heard of another model that works like that. So it's really great.
Thank you.
Let me throw one quick question, and this is Steve Smaby out here in Mora. I see a lot of folks I recognize here, but what have you found on the cost of the renovation? Because, we've got the same thing in Mora, so many old houses. And when you start looking at it, oh, let's restore all these old houses. And the cost, when you start looking, you think, oh my God, this is, we could build 3 new houses for what it costs to fix up one old one.
Yeah, we were under budgeting. We were underestimating the cost that it would take to get these homes back up to a livable standard. It's like any construction project or remodel project, once you get into it, there's always something else that you find that you need to fix. But we haven't run into the fact that it would be as much money as building a new home. But they have been more expensive than we had anticipated. And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers on what we've spent on those 2 homes. So I can't give you any kind of real, data on that, but I'd be happy to find out and report back on how much we've spent and what we budgeted. So you can kind of see how COVID has actually even impacted that.
Thank you, Lynn. It looks like maybe Jeff and Willa questions, hands raised. Jeff, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm not good. I'm not muted. I just in a quick comment on Cuesta, we have a lot of those homes here. A lot of them were second homes that nobody even uses anymore. But we can't, those people don't, almost all of them don't want to sell. And if we can find them, sometimes we can't even find them. We have a local deputy who's been looking at vacant homes and then trying to find out, and it's like, and they don't want to sell. But I can't do anything about that. But my question is, I've been talking to a local business owner. Well, I shouldn't say he's local, but he bought the what we used to call the corner market here in Eagle Nest, and he bought the trailer court next to it. And he intends to put affordable, I like the workforce housing. That makes it kind of better, I think. Or I also like the term below market housing too, but workforce housing sounds more, I don't know, goes back to Dawson with the coal mines and everything. And those weren't bad houses, some of them, but anyway, we've got a 2-acre lot that we have already plotted out and put in part of our plan that's right next to this. And what I talked to him about was, so we've got an extra 2 acres. He's got about 1.5 acres with the trailer court, and it's already there. It's already ready to go. He doesn't want to build on any property that he doesn't own. And I wouldn't want to either, unless it was like 100-year lease or something, And my question is, is there an agreement that we could, if we sold him that land and we said, you're going to use so much of this for workforce housing, for employees in town, people who work for the village, people who work for the school, that type of thing. Is there some kind of a legal contract involved where we could require that? And I see Jen shaking her head yes, and that sounds great. And I figure that's something I would talk to a lawyer about down the road, but you guys probably have already ran into that.
So Willa, maybe we can tag team this, and I'm going to make it really brief, but there are ways that you can negotiate what you want in return for the land, and the land won't be enough, right? So you want to be, it's a negotiation of what they can afford to do. The biggest thing that we like to tell our clients is think about who's going to administer it. So try to have whatever request you're asking, a very low barrier for administration, right? The simplest thing possible in terms of, because what we see a lot is people use deed restrictions and other things, and there's nobody to administer them, and then they're not administered, and then nothing happens. So yeah, but there's a lot out there you can borrow from. Willa, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I just like the direction it's going. I think it's part of, the art of the deal with these things often is to be creative and try to harness the different, because nobody's doing this alone, right? So like, you need to harness different kinds of expertise and, oh, I have this land and you know how to do building and, oh, so-and-so could bring financing. And, it's always a puzzle with a lot of different players in the mix. And I don't think there's ever like a template that we kind of plunk down again and again. But I would totally second what Jen says about, trying to keep things simple, even as they are inherently complex. If you're, one of the primary lessons learned that I feel like I get hit over the head with again and again is that just building something isn't adequate because the people with the most resources will come in and scoop it up. So you need some kind of mechanism to ensure that it is serving who you want it to serve, but that can get very over-engineered when we get into our firefighters more valuable than teachers who are more valuable than, the guy who's running the restaurant or whatever, and it just gets way too complicated. So anyway, we can have a whole other session on that. But I wanted to actually circle back to Lynn's comments about bringing back the abandoned homes and the innovation of that program, because I'm working on something similar in the San Luis Valley, and it's a 6-county area, just to the north of you all. And they started, 2 agencies up there started piloting a program to bring abandoned homes. They've done 3 so far, and they want to really expand this because they're doing a pretty extensive inventory. And we know now, we're over 100, I think, abandoned homes identified throughout these little, sort of villages in that valley. And so we want to try to figure out how to scale this program. What we found with the 3 that we've done so far is that we were able to purchase the home and do the renovations for a little over 100,000. And so that is really cost effective compared to building from the ground up with just where we're at with today's construction costs. So I think it's well worth it. And even one of the little homes was a woman who was able to move out of public housing. Another was a woman who the home was in her family for a long time, and she had actually found herself homeless in California. And she was able to kind of come back into the valley and be stably housed. And then another was a widow. And so it had all ended up being sort of these elder, these elders who were, really improving their housing situation in this very gracious way. So I'm intrigued about we definitely are finding in that inventory up there, the problem around, people have this legacy and they want to hold on to it. And so Lynn, I was just really intrigued about how you all structured that to have sort of a shared benefit. And I'd love to just maybe chat more and connect you with the San Luis people if you were willing to do some collaboration and thinking together, because it's certainly I think it's just wonderful to around something going from being blighted to something that the neighborhood's proud of.
And absolutely, Will, I would be very happy to connect with the folks that are working in the Valley. So yes, I'll follow up with you on that.
Thank you. Awesome.
Jen, I don't know if there's any more questions. I know we're at 5 till 5, and I wanted to just make a few announcements or give a little bit more information. Are there any last questions from anybody? I don't want to cut off discussion at all. So,
Monica?
Yes.
Margaret again, sorry.
Hi, Margaret. I'm like, who's yelling at me? Margaret, good to see you after all this time, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, you can only see my name. You're going to send this recording out later, correct? Is that what you said?
It will be posted on our website. We'll post
Perfect,
it
thanks.
on our website,
Okay.
which I think is in the chat. And Jen had put a comment earlier, so I thought I'd just follow up on this about the anti-donation clause. So let me just give some information about that really quickly. So if you are a local government or a governmental entity, and Steve touched on a lot of these components in his presentation, even though he's not in New Mexico, you know, you have to do things a little bit differently than just, you know, partnering with the developer and building homes. So in our state, the way we do that, most everyone is familiar with the Local Economic Development Act, but we have a corollary to that, which is the Affordable Housing Act. And that's where a community develops an affordable housing plan and adopts it. And then pretty much any development you do, any contributions that you make under the auspices of that plan will be eligible, and you won't have an anti-donation issue. Now, that is to say, if you go out and do a public process to find a developer, you know, you have to go through an RFP process and make that a public competition. And then you can find a developer and you can move forward with them on a public-private partnership. One of the issues that we have, which all of you have raised, is that some of the people you're trying to house are not necessarily, they're moderate income, and sometimes they might even be higher income workers. And so the Affordable Housing Act has baked into it some things about people being lower moderate income. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but I think if you create a development that serves people at various income levels, you can probably work through those issues. So we're more than happy to help you with that. If I know Colfax County has a plan, I think and it's adopted by the county, but I think the various communities in Colfax County each need to adopt it also to have it cover their particular project. So I just wanted to bring that up. Taos County and the town of Taos also have a plan. Rio Arriba and the city of Espanola also have a plan. I think that covers most everybody on the call. And then I wanted to announce that, you know, some of you are already working with us, and I wanted to say this, that Willa's firm is on contract with us, and Jen is part of that team. And so what we've been offering, and we're probably going to only be able to do 4 of these with the money that we have now, and we almost have 4 at this point. We're trying to identify 4 projects in 4 communities, and certainly the idea about vacant homes, we hadn't discussed that, but that might be one of the communities may choose that option, and this could look a little different. But for the ones that want to do new development, what we're trying to do is develop a site plan for you. You know, how many units would you be able to develop? Kind of like the image that Willa pulled up earlier, kind of a basic schematic. And that would have to be based on knowing who you're serving. You know, Jen brought this up earlier, and Willa as well. You know, we need to know what employees are we trying to serve? How much do they make? You know, how do these homes need to be priced? There needs to be a lot of that type of information. And then coming up with some kind of pro forma for development and, you know, how this affordable housing development would work. The reason we chose this is we heard from a lot of folks that they were tired of doing planning and they didn't want to do any more. There is planning components in there, but they actually wanted an actionable plan to move forward with. So right now we are working with the city of Espanola on a site that they own, the Cimarron School District on a site in Cimarron, and potentially some other sites in Angel Fire and Eagle Nest that the school district owns. And then we've talked to Mayor Carr about his site in Eagle Nest as well. And we've also talked to the North Central Regional Transit District about them possibly partnering on the city of Espanola's project because they're adjacent. We've talked to Taos County about a potential site with the county. And we have had some conversations with the town of Taos, but we haven't nailed down a site. So this is kind of going on in the background, and I just want to let you know these are the consultants that we are working with. So as you can see, it's a very good team, very knowledgeable, and I think it's a great benefit. The other thing I wanted to announce is I'm going to try and do 2 more of these, and I just want to thank Jen for doing, and all of the speakers for doing all this work for us, because really all I did was show up and talk. So thank you guys for bringing all these great people together. The next couple, I'll do the heavy lift. The plan, well, actually, Willa will be helping with this too. We're putting together kind of a toolbox, like a housing 101 for everybody that talks about the various types of financing and funding that's available out there. And so that'll be one of the sessions that we do in the upcoming months. The other one I want to put together is local governments who have done financing for housing developments in New Mexico, either through the New Mexico Finance Authority or through private activity bonds. And we'll be putting together a little webinar on that, on financing by local government. So those are the two we have planned. And I hope this is helpful, and I hope this kind of kicks off our work on housing that all of you have been requesting. So let's see if I got through everything. I think I got through everything. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope we can disseminate the presentation a little wider and have a few more people take a look at it once it's up on the website.
Hey, Monica,
Yes, Commissioner.
would it be okay for me to invite local business owners to these presentations?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I just wasn't sure who you were looking for in your audience.
We're sending this out to our entire email list. And so it's pretty broad. And then I think people can self-select if they want to attend. So whoever you want to forward it to who might be interested is perfectly fine.
Well, I'd like to get the resort in Philmont, maybe a couple of large ranches in if I can on the next one.
That'd be great. Ben, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening, and hopefully we'll get to see some of you in person soon. Can't wait to get down there. And then thanks to my Durango friends for sharing.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Willa.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.